right, welcome back to the Gravity Podcast. We are here today with Dr. Mark Goulston. Mark, thank you for joining me.
I was really looking forward to this because I've checked out the podcast and I've checked out the quality of conversations that you have, and it gives me something to live up to.
Well, I am very happy to have you here, and I am not worried at all about you living up to our past episodes. I'm really excited to have a chance to hear your story and your journey. And anybody in the world of psychiatry, for me, is always fascinating. I'm a kind of a closet, wanted to be a psychologist, never had the kind of courage and confidence to go that route with my career when I was younger, but I've loved the field. And really excited to learn more about your path.
It's interesting you say that because I'm not sure it was courage or confidence that led me down that, which really goes back to my past, because I've accomplished a fair amount of things. If people Google me, they'll say, boy, he's done a lot. But I think my greatest personal, psychological, emotional accomplishment is I dropped out of medical school twice and finished. I don't know anyone who dropped out twice and finished. And I didn't drop out to see the world. I had untreated depression. So the first time I dropped out, and what happened is I was highlighting books, hoping that I could hold on to the information, and I really couldn't. So the first leave of absence I took, I worked in blue collar jobs. One of my favorite was I had a van, and I would put up a liquor store and bar items for a liquor distributing company. So I would speak to the bartenders in South Boston, and I'd debate with them and say, you can have 2 Heineken windmills if you keep one up in your store for a month, and you can keep the second one down in your basement, because they all collect this stuff. If you go into the basement of a bar owner or liquor store owner, you're going to die from neon, because they got all these things that they take from their stores. But I loved it. And my mind calmed down to really a blue collar level of conversation, interaction. I went back to medical school, and then it happened again. And my mind just wouldn't work.
Mark, I want to just interrupt you for a second, because I really want to go deep with you on that. And I'm tempted to do that right now. There's a lot of interest just in the subject that you've just touched on. I mean, there's a lot there around dropping out of college and letting your mind rest and depression. And I'd love to hear more about, the second time and how you eventually made it through. So we're going to come back to that, because what I really want to do is give the listener the full experience that even led you to that point to begin with, including, potentially maybe some of the threads that even had you in a depression, if there is a connection there. So can you start at the beginning for me? Just tell me a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing, your family dynamics, where you're from. Just paint the picture a little bit for the listener of those early years.
Well, as long as you're holding my hand, my friend.
I'm with you.
I grew up in a suburb of Boston called Newton, Massachusetts. I had 2 older brothers, and hardworking dad, depression age dad, and I have a feeling that I was a creative, but I think what he thought about is, you're never going to make a living as a creative. So whenever I wanted to go down creative paths, he would basically talk me out of it. And so it's not unusual. I'm a baby boomer. When you're a Jewish child from the suburbs, you go to college, it's not unusual to either go to law school or medical school. Seemed to be a lot going in that way. And so I chose to go to medical school. And I wasn't really that excited about it, except for the fact that I cared about other people. And so I think that's what drew me into medical school. I'll tell you an insight that I've recently felt, because I know many lawyers, and my son is in his second year of law school. And the difference between going to law school or medical school, I could be wrong on this, but I've spent some time thinking about it. I think I could relate to helplessness, because there were many times when I felt helpless. And I think I wanted to give help to other people who were feeling helpless in their pain. I think people who go to law school might not have felt helpless, but they might have felt powerless. So I'm going to go to a place where I have power. I didn't go to medical school to have power. I went to medical school to be helpful. But I don't know if that lands. It would be an interesting study to see if some of the driving forces of lawyers is, I'm not going to feel powerless. I'm going to go into some profession and I'm going to be powerful.
Oh, I'm certain, and you would know this technically, that there's all kinds of little events, traumas, or conditioning that happens at a very young age that can really set you on a path. If that's true about lawyers, I would imagine most of them are unconscious to it.
No, absolutely. As well as doctors. And it was interesting when I did finally go to college, and I went to UC Berkeley during the 60s. So we're talking the hippie, the peak of the hippie phenomena. And whenever I would move towards a creative major, my father, who was, he worked at a company and he was the controller, and he was the one who would hire and fire people. So the CEO, was a people person, but my father was assigned kind of the dirty work. And so my father would kind of grill me. And I'll never forget when I finally said, I think I'm going to be pre-med. He said, that's my boy. And I held on to a little bit of a grudge, which my father died in 94, and I've let go of that. Because he didn't grill me when I said, I think I'm going to be pre-med. See, I didn't mind the grilling, but I wanted him to be an equal opportunity griller. So as soon as I was doing something, but I've forgiven him because I saw that there was a part of him that wanted me to have the autonomy of being a doctor or a lawyer that maybe he didn't have. And so I could see that part of the reason for his channeling me in that direction was really that he wanted the best for me. But still, look, you got to remember, I was a child of the 60s. We had the Vietnam War protest, all these things. So I had kind of a chip on my shoulder. And then I go into medical school, and because my heart is not in it, and I was also an idealist. I made it more difficult for myself than I needed to because I was an idealist. So, for instance, they had old exams up in the library because, most of the professors don't change their exams. They change a few questions. But I felt it was wrong to look at old exams. I felt that was cheating. So I made it more difficult on myself because and that follows my entire life, where I wouldn't cut a corner if there was something that just didn't seem right about it. And so then what happened is I got depressed, dropped out of medical school, worked in a blue-collar job, came back, and then my depression came back. And then the second time I sought to drop out, I met with I think you'll like this story. I met with the head of the school. The dean of the school cares about money. And I don't even remember the meeting. And I was pretty low. And then I get a call from the dean of students who cares about students. And he says, Mark, you better get in here. I got a letter from the dean of the school. And I think the dean of the school was worried that I might hurt myself. Because when I met with the dean of students, I read the letter from the other dean, and it said, I met with Mr. Goulston. We talked about other careers, and I'm advising the promotions committee that he be asked to withdraw. And I said, what does this mean? And the dean of students said, you've been kicked out. And I kind of caved over. It was like a gunshot wound to the stomach. And I know what that's like because I had a perforated colon that I almost died from about 12 years ago. And I just kind of caved in, and I felt something wet on my cheeks, and I thought I was bleeding from my eyes. I mean, this gets a little bit weird. And I touch my cheekbones, and it's tears. And so imagine the upbringing I came from. You're only worth what you can do in life. And at that point, I didn't feel like I could do much. And something to tee this up, because this will be important when you understand the significance of what the dean of students said to me. During my first leave of absence, I wrote a poem that got published in a journal of geriatric psychiatry, and it was called Lament for the Old, because I just looked around and I say, boy, we don't really treat old people that well. We're not patient. We want to focus on people where you can give them more life. And the bottom stanza, I'll just read from Lament for the Old, because one of the lines says that I am now 3 times the age of when I wrote this. And the bottom stanza, which the dean of students must have seen this, it says, I then took the time to get to know some of these marvelous people 3 times my age, which I'm now, who offered a wealth of experience that spanned hundreds of years. What was so obviously missing was someone to share the fullness of the past and to help relieve the loneliness of the future, and maybe someone to give a damn when they died. So it's kind of ironic because I'm 3 times that age. So going back to his telling me that they kicked me out in my cratering, imagine hearing this. I don't know if you have ever had the feeling that people's love and approval is tied to your accomplishment, but it's not an unusual dynamic. And so he says to me, Mark, you didn't mess up, but you are messed up. Meaning I was passing everything. He said, but if you get unmessed up, I think the school would be glad they gave you a second chance. So he's talking against the dean of the school. And I start to then cry from the compassion and the understanding. And then he says, and even if you don't get unmessed up, even if you don't become a doctor, even if you don't do anything with the rest of your life, I would be proud to know you. And my eyes are just pouring. And he said, because you have a streak of goodness in you that we don't grade in medical school, we should. And you have no idea how much the world needs that goodness. And you're not going to know it till you're 35. But you have to make it till you're 35. And then he said, look at me, because I was looking away and I was crying. He said, look at me, but you have to make it till you're 35. He points his finger at me and he says, and you deserve to be on this planet, and you're going to let me help you. If he had said to me, if I can help you, give me a call, I would have gone back to my apartment. I'm not confident that I'd be here today. So he grabbed me by the nape of the neck. He stood up to the promotions committee that he was part of. And then I met with them. And I guess they saw something in me that he did. And they gave me a second leave of absence. But why? I just want to connect that to what I'm doing presently, because everything's come full circle. In the last year, I started a company called Michelangelo Mindset. And what Michelangelo Mindset stands for is teaching people to see the angel in the marble and set it free. That's what Michelangelo did. So I've created courses for an accelerator of startups. And I teach them to think like Michelangelo. Inside your investors is someone who wants to give you money. Inside your customers and clients is someone who wants to buy from you. Inside talent you want to attract is that someone who wants to work for you. You have to see it clearly what they really, really want and set it free. But why it's come full circle, and I didn't realize this when I started Michelangelo Mindset, the dean of students was Michelangelo, and I was the David in my future. Because what happened is I finished medical school. I went to UCLA, trained in psychiatry. One of my mentors was the pioneer in the study of suicide prevention. And for 25 years, I focused on suicide prevention, and none of my patients died by suicide. And all I did was pay it forward.
Really fascinating. Let's back up, because you've said a lot that's really interesting to me, and appreciate you sharing that story. It's a very good one, and I hope that there's people listening that can also see themselves in you and in your journey. And that's really the whole point of this podcast, but no probably more important moment, for or learning if you're in fact somebody who's at that point in your life, whether it be on the verge of suicide or depression, to be able to be told that somebody cared about you and believed in you, regardless of your accomplishments, and to hear that you were able to come through that and come out on the other side quite successfully and then give it back is really inspiring. I want to back up a little bit, though, and talk a little bit more about this piece, which I'm personally really fascinated with. And it's not, a coincidence. My own experience, like yours, kind of funny, in the kind of, Jewish stereotypes, right? I also had a father who was pretty clear about what he thought was best for me. And not just for me, but like all men should do X. In my case, that was, look a certain way and talk a certain way and act a certain way, kind of high standards for being. And that certainly filtered into how you spent your time as a kid, athletics, all the kind of, stereotypical male roles, including as I aged, what that meant in terms of studies and career, for sure. And even if some of it wasn't said, it was kind of what, I took on. It was implied, I believe. And I think that, society, and maybe today things have changed a little bit. Maybe in the 60s at Berkeley, things were different, but stereotypically, traditionally, generally speaking, society tells us how we're supposed to be. And maybe it's, again, better in certain places. I live in Ohio, and I often feel kind of the societal conditioning about how we're supposed to look and act and do and what's right. And I'm just curious, to the extent that you can maybe elaborate a little bit on your memories of wanting to be this creative. That to me, again, is another piece that I'm personally very fascinated and passionate about, is that I truly believe that we were all born to be creative, and that the definition of creativity has been limited to the fine arts, but that, creation is what is inside of all of us at a very young age. And it is that parental societal conditioning that takes us away from that and onto a different path. And so I'd like to better understand a little bit more about your experience as a kid, as somebody that had that desire to be creative, and what it's been like for you to fight against that conditioning to find yourself into present day.
Well, I'll share an anecdote that I don't often share, only because I'm remembering it and you're creating the space. I've done a lot in my life. I've trained hostage negotiators. I was part of the O.J. Simpson criminal trial. I was an advisor to the prosecution. I've spoken in Moscow, been a headliner along with a Nobel Prize winner named Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. So, I've accomplished a lot. But I'm going to tell you the most powerful moment of my entire life. And the most powerful moment was when I was telling my father I was dropping out. And I remember I had to tell him because there was a certain window in which you could get your tuition back. And I remember I met with him. And again, everybody was kind of intimidated by him in his company, even the CEO, because he was the guy who had the nerve to fire people. And he wasn't, I don't think he was brutal, but he was pretty direct, and he just tell you, why you're fired. And so he was like that as a dad. And I remember meeting with him, and I'm sitting across from him. And he kind of looks at me like, what's this about? And I said, I'm leaving medical school. And he said, what'd you flunk out? I said, no, I'm not flunking. He said, well, I don't get it. And then I shared, that I was feeling down and whatever. And he didn't hear that. And that I was, trying to hold on to information I couldn't. He still didn't get it. And there was a point at which he said, look, you're not flunking. We'll find a tutor. It seems like a waste. And I remember he came on so strong that I looked down, and I remember him talking to me. And I don't remember the exact words, but I had this feeling if I go back, something bad's going to happen. And I've never been destructive to another person. And there was a point he's talking, and then he reaches a point where he said, so we're agreed you're not going to drop out. You're going to go back, you'll get a tutor and whatever. And so I don't know if you can imagine this, but try to. So here's the person who is, in retrospect, I realized he wanted the best for us, but he was tough. And he could look at you with the kind of, at times, if he didn't like something, he'd look at you with disgust. It's not an unusual dad. Believe me, as a psychiatrist, there were many worse dads I'd come into seeing patients. So I remember I'm just thinking, I can't go back. And then I lifted my eyes up and I looked into his eyes like I'm looking into yours. And I said, you don't seem to understand. I'm afraid. Very concise. I just stared at him. I held on to his eyes and the tears just came down my cheeks and I just stared him down. He didn't say anything because I was just looking into his eyes. And then he looked down, clenched his fist, and said, do what you need to do. We'll try and support you. That was the most powerful moment of my life. But can you understand why? And so if you're listening to this, now I took a chance. He could have said, stop being weak. It could have been like General Patton slapping me, man up. But I will tell you, if you're listening into this, if you're just honest and you just are raw like that, and you don't even know why you're afraid or you're hurt, and you just look into the eyes of your mom or dad and you just let the hurt show and you let the tears flow because it is the most honest you've ever been in your life, it's the most powerful moment in your life. And I think what happened is our relationship turned a corner because I don't think he really ever backed down from almost anyone. But that's the power of true, raw vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have two kids in college, and so a lot of this, really hits home, and consequently, I think because of the experience I had as a kid and my own therapy and work on myself, because I didn't used to be this way when my kids were little. I've kind of gone, all the way to the other side, and hope that I've created the space for my kids to have those kind of conversations. But I still know that there's still some communication that maybe feels difficult for whatever reasons. Stories that kids take on, and I'm not just talking about my own, but in general, there's whether it be parental or societal, peer pressure, whatever it is, sometimes it is really difficult to look a parent in the eye, look anyone in the eye, and speak your truth. And so I'm curious, for you at that point in your life, was it that you had kind of gotten to a rock bottom, so to speak? What was it that had you able in that moment to hold that gaze and say those words, "I'm afraid"?
I think it was the rock bottom, because the more he said, "You're going back, you're going back, you're going back," the more, I was probably inside on the brink of panic, but it was rock bottom. But I'm going to give you, and people who are listening in who are parents, because I speak around the world. A couple of weeks ago, I've become close friends with a fellow named Jason Reed. His 14-year-old son died by suicide 3 years ago. He left a couple suicide notes. One were his passcodes, and Jason looked in his computer, and his son had been trying to kill himself for 6 months. And the other Post-it note said, "Tell my story." So Jason put over $200,000 of his own money into a documentary, which you can see for free if you look up "Tell My Story" film. And he went up and down the West Coast talking to people about, why did my son do this? A couple of weeks ago, he and I did 2 90-minute global YPO Zoom calls. YPOs all around the world. We did 2 90-minute ones where he shared what he's learned and what he missed. And I shared some tips for getting through to your child. So I'm going to give you, but mainly give your audience, some coaching tips if you have a teenager or child and you're worried about. Because these are difficult conversations. And the way you tee it up, if you're a parent, is we can all say to our teenagers, all of us parents are worried. We have no idea what effect the pandemic is having on kids your age. And we're all a little bit worried. So you tee it up because teenagers hate unsolicited heart-to-heart conversations. Do this when you're in the middle of an activity, like you're driving. Don't just bring them to do a face-to-face thing. They will hate it. But while you're driving or doing an activity, you tee it up the way I said, and you can say, "Can I ask you a few things?" And I can't imagine them saying no. They probably won't say yes. They'll say, "What?" And what is a yes? And here are the 4 prompts. The first one is, at its absolute worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about yourself or your life? They're going to go, "What?" And you say, at its absolute worst, how awful are you capable of feeling? How much pain about your life or yourself? And in one of my recent books, I introduced the approach I use with all my suicidal patients called surgical empathy. So you're getting a taste of surgical empathy, which is going deeper. And your child might say, "Pretty awful." And you say, "Pretty awful" or "very awful." Okay, very awful. Second prompt. When you're feeling very awful, how alone are you capable of feeling with it? Just by yourself. Pretty alone, or all alone. Okay already, all alone. The third prompt is, take me to the last time you felt that. They're going to say, what? Or they're going to say, WTF? And you say, yeah, was it in the middle of the night because we heard you walking around in your room, or some other time? And here's something that happens when you can get another person to describe something so clearly that you see it with your eyes, they re-feel it. Yeah, I was walking around. It was in the middle of the night. Yeah, we heard that. What was going on? Well, I couldn't sleep. I tried to sleep. I couldn't sleep, so I was just walking around. Then what happened? Well, I just got so frustrated. I felt like kicking the wall. That sounds terrible. What happened next? I didn't know what to do. I was looking for some of your expired medications. Did you find any? No, couldn't find any. What happened next? I didn't know what I was going to do. And then the sun rose. So you get them to talk it out. And then the fourth thing, and by this time, you're looking right into their eyes with all the love, care, protection, and concern you have as a mom or dad. And you say, I got a favor to ask you. When you're ever feeling that way, or even heading down that road, I want you to do whatever it takes to get my or your mom or your dad's undivided attention. Because our minds are filled with all kinds of things. And there is nothing more important to each of us to find a way to help you feel less alone when you're feeling that awful. Do you understand me? So could you track with that?
Oh, yeah, very much so. In fact, I was taking notes just to make sure I really did. I think that's really important. And I'm also interested in following up on that documentary. And certainly, I'm a member of YPO, so there are a lot of resources out there. And I think at times it can be a little overwhelming, frankly, especially if you're in a very difficult time trying to just, kind of keep your head above water. But that guidance and the other resources that you've referenced, those things, I'm sure have a lot of value and can be really helpful. And I appreciate you sharing that. And
let me give another resource because the YPO talk was private, and I think it's available to YPO members. But there's a lot of people listening in who aren't members of YPO. But if you look up Teen Mental Health Webinar, it's about a 40-minute video, and the first 9 minutes is Jason's Goalcast talk that got, I think, 9 million views at Goalcast. And he's talking to a group of 12 male founders. And he basically said, this is how I screwed up, and this is how we all screw up. He said, when you're an entrepreneur, you solve problems. You turn everything into a problem and you give advice. But when someone's really suicidal, they're stuck. They can't come to where you are. They'll smile politely or they'll just be angry, but you're not helping them. You have to get to where they're at. And Jason did something really interesting. He said, close your eyes, raise your hand if you ever felt less than, if you ever felt like a failure, if you ever felt bullied, if you ever felt whatever. Everybody raised their hand. He said, open your eyes. And he said, how many of you have shared that with any of your children? None of them. He said, we need to be able to share our own vulnerability because otherwise they're going to look at us as the role model and they're just losers. And so that goes on for 9 minutes. And then I think the next 25 minutes is me giving advice to parents, just like I just gave you. You're worried about your teenager. This is what's going on. Here's how you can reach them. And that's filled with tips. So that's a shorter version of the 90-minute version that we did with YPO.
Sorry, what's Jason's last name for people that want to find the Goalcast?
Jason Reid, R-E-I-D,
Mm-hmm.
Goalcast, and you'll find it. And it may have been called the most important conversation you'll ever have with your kid.
Great. Wonderful. Okay. So thank you. Really, really appreciate you sharing all of that. I do think that, even for myself, maybe a lot of us have underestimated the impacts of COVID and what's going on in general right now, maybe beyond COVID, just the kind of magnitude of any number of issues that are bubbling up, at this time, and what kind of impact that has on all of us, but especially teenagers. And that this is really this might be the real epidemic of our world right now. Is this mental health epidemic and suicide prevention and really the work that you do. I am intrigued with the kind of entrepreneur part and what you're doing there, but I'm more fascinated, and I actually I do want to give you a chance to expand upon that, because I really do believe that it might be, or at least in part, it is the responsibility of entrepreneurs. And I'm involved with conscious capitalism, but people that are creating in a way that is beneficial for society and doing that from a healthy, sustainable place, as opposed to kind of the way that, traditionally founders and CEOs and others were required to operate within the business world. I believe that can be a huge unlock in the path forward. But
let me interrupt you.
Sure.
Because I'm giving you a message to bring back to your community.
Great.
Entrepreneurs, especially male entrepreneurs, and increasingly female entrepreneurs, are afraid of emotion. They're afraid of feeling. And one of the reasons, and I have a podcast called My Wakeup Call, where I interview people about their purpose, their calling, and their origin story. And I have a wide range of people, from Larry King to Doug Conan to Jordan Peterson. I'm releasing 3 podcasts a week because I have 40 recorded episodes in the queue. And I interviewed a fellow named Chip Conley. Chip Conley owned a hotel chain, Joie de Vivre. He sold it. He pivoted to Airbnb. But he was very real in our podcast called My Wakeup Call. He said, I reached a point where I had all the money in the world, but 5 of my friends died by suicide. I was feeling depressed and suicidal. And I realized I was addicted to achievement. And so we drilled down, and what we talked about, and this is the message to give back to your community. I said, there's a possibility, Chip, that you have the syndrome of disavowed yearning. And what that means is, when we were in the womb, we were whole. When we are born, we're not whole. We're totally dependent. And we're not just dependent on food and being clothed. We're dependent on an emotional connection with our parents. We didn't need that in the womb. We were mainlining through that placenta. But if it's not to be had, because our parents just can't connect in their well-meaning, and we pivot to achievement, they like it. Oh, look at what look what my daughter can do. And so, and by the way, if you can disavow needing that emotional connection, meaning you say to yourself, I don't need it. I don't need to be close to another human being because I can accomplish anything except closeness. And then what happens is you can run with that for 45, 50 years until you can't anymore. And you say, geez, I've achieved a lot. I'm financially okay, but something's missing. And what's missing is the disavowed yearning to have a connection that you didn't pay any attention to because achievement took over. And it's possible in later years to achieve that. It's interesting. I used to do house calls to dying patients, some very powerful ones. And there was one who I can't mention, who everybody knew and loved. He was an icon in the entertainment industry. And I remember I saw him one day and I say, "You look like crap. What is it? I don't think it's because you're dying. You've been dying as long as I know you. What's going on?" So he liked that I was a straight shooter. And he said to me, "I don't think I've ever done anything important in my life." I said, "What? You got a hospital named after you. You got thousands of fans. What's the deal here?" And he looked at me and he said, "Don't con a con man, especially when he's dying. I've got all the love that money can buy. That's all it's worth. And maybe, just maybe, I outsmarted myself. And I've run out of time. Everything I thought was important isn't. And everything I thought was unimportant is. And I've just plain run out of time." So if you're someone like me and you're doing house calls like this, you have to be an idiot to not learn important lessons about life, which I have. So thank you for letting me do that full frontal push there.
No. I'm glad you did. Yeah, I've learned in being a amateur podcast host, but we've recorded almost 100 episodes now, and I've learned when it's time to get out of the way a little bit, and you're sharing some really powerful learning. So I'm very grateful for that. And maybe you could just really drill that point home a little bit even more. Because I also, in fact, I had this conversation with my therapist today about the power of learning when you're teaching, and just what you get to see out of humanity, the mirror, the reflection, the learning that's there for you to grab. And I am sure you having a front row seat to all kinds of people that are either sick, dying, depressed, suicidal, on and on and on. There's been a tremendous amount of learning. And so I'm hearing you make the point, and I admire Chip, and I know what he's doing now. I'm also in the real estate business, so I've seen him speak before live back when we did that. But this idea of connection and what's really important, outsmarting ourselves. When I hear that, it feels very unconscious that somebody could outsmart themselves, that you almost have to kind of not even realize you're doing it until you're faced with something of magnitude, a rock bottom, and sadly, in this case, maybe death. I also believe that there are some intuitive little kind of sparks or flashes or sensations at a minimum along the way. And I can just speak for myself and being real honest with you and our audience that I know I do this and have done this, that we ignore, that it's not so unconscious, that sometimes we kind of know, but and I call it conditioning, and I'm not trained at all to do this, but that's kind of the language that I've learned and use. There's probably some better technical way to describe this, but we for some reason, even if we know, even if we have some sense, the choice to follow that and instead what we end up doing is going with the thing we know, or the thing we think we're supposed to do, or the thing we think maybe if I just do that more, it'll bring me what I'm looking for. Why is it that it's so hard for human beings to choose connection, love, things that, we all know really probably matter more than anything else. It does that come back to this childhood societal trauma conditioning? Talk a little bit about, I guess, to be, real specific, why is it and what is it? Why do we do it? And what is it we really should be focused on choosing?
Well, I think it falls under the umbrella of alpha conditioning, alpha energy, because I'm seeing one of the things that really worries me is I am seeing alpha women who are just amazing. They are just dynamic. But what's happening is some of their children are really having problems, because I will tell you, and it's a kindly dad is a distant second to a warm, patient mommy. And alpha energy doesn't have the patience to be warm and patient. And part of what keeps people prisoners of alpha, that wouldn't be a bad book, Prisoners of Alpha, is that we live in a psychological silo where competence is hardwired to confidence is hardwired to control. And so we try to pull things into our lane where we feel competent, confident, and in control. That's why when someone's coming at us and they're emotional, they're pulling us out of that silo of competence, confidence, and control. And I'll give you a hack. This is so magical if you're an alpha and you get into arguments with someone who's not an alpha. It's called the FUD-CRUD intervention. And FUD-CRUD, you'll remember. That's why we came up with it. So imagine someone's venting at you, complaining, or they're giving you the silent treatment. But imagine if they're venting, you're so clueless. Stop giving me advice. I don't want such and such. It's not an unusual thing to hear as an entrepreneur from a personal relationship. So instead of saying to them, calm down, you're getting too emotional, which is only going to make it worse. Here's the FUD-CRUD tactic. It is magical. It's similar to the Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope that he did with George Foreman in Zaire. You let them hit you with their best shot. You pause for a couple seconds. You look them in the eye and you say, and it can't be condescending, you say, you sound frustrated and I think you're holding back. What? You sound frustrated and I think you're holding back because I think you're upset and disappointed too. That's the FUD. What? Yeah, you sound frustrated, but I'm betting you're also upset and disappointed. Can you fill me in on all those things and maybe we can handle this in a better way? And what you want to do using surgical empathy is when they tell you what they're frustrated about, you go deeper. Say more about that. Talk to me at my worst. Wow, I did that. Ooh. And then when you finish up with the frustration and what upsets you about that is, and then whatever they say, open them up even more. And what you're going to notice is they're going to calm down. And then when you get to, I'll bet you're disappointed too. Disappointed in me, disappointed that we're doing this again. Maybe disappointed in yourself. What's that about? But if you can patiently go through the layers of the onion, by the time you're talking about what they're disappointed about, it's a very calm conversation. Also, if you can be compassionate, saying to yourself, my intention is never to cause the kind of pain that they're talking about, but I've done it. And when they're talking about what they're disappointed about, it's very calm and it enables you to look them in the eye and say, I did all that. I do all that. You deserve better. I'm sorry. I'm going to fix this. And you will mean it. But can you follow the tracking that I'm giving you as you go from one layer to the next to the next?
Yes. Yes, I can. My late therapist, who was kind of a local celebrity to the CEO, YPO, community, he used to call it going down the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
That you kind of just stay in there and just kind of keep. I hear you. You're frustrated, and just kind of hang in there with them and then, I love the part of kind of owning it. You've said this, a number of ways, that it's really important for our children. I also think it's really important as leaders, as CEOs, founders, or managers, anyone in a role model position of any kind, to really kind of debunk the story that we're better than we are. That we're again, this is, why I enjoy this podcast, and I hope why it matters to other people. And it sounds like you do something, similar with yours. We need to hear the stories, that a guy like you who has had so much success, who's achieved so much, why you got on that path to begin with, the fact that you were also at one point in your life depressed enough to drop out of college twice. I mean, again, I don't think people really look at college dropouts as people like you. And yet there are many people like you. There are many people who have dropped out of college who have gone on to do incredible things. I mean, that's a whole subject by itself, whether or not college is something that we should be putting on our children in the same way that we used to put on them doctors and lawyers. I mean, where is the line, that we should be, because I believe my parents, your parents, your dad, others, the intentions are generally good, but, we put stuff on our kids without giving them the full story and the full picture. And I think that's why, your stories that you're sharing today are so important.
I want to, you just triggered something that some more unsolicited advice, but I'm on a mission here.
Great. I'll take it. I'm loving it.
Something that I notice with a lot of entrepreneurs in both their personal and their leadership style is they have really good intentions, but their intentions don't match their behavior. So if their intention is always, I want to bring out the best in people, I want them to be the most successful possible, but their way of doing it is counterproductive, they think it's the other person's fault because they know that my intentions are only good. But the point is, there's a saying, we have some control, not a lot, over what and how we say something. We have zero control over how it's heard. And you need to take that into consideration. It's interesting. I have an accelerator course that I've presented 4 times now to cohorts of 15 founders about how to pitch to investors. And the whole idea, and I have this company called Michelangelo Mindset. And I said, the whole idea is that when you're with an investor, they want to give you their money. They don't want to sit on their money. But you have to clear away everything that gets in the way of it. And one of the things that gets in the way of it is being too passionate about your company when they're listening for the details of whether it can be successful and whether it can, whether there's going to be a return and profitability. And that's one of the problems for a lot of founders. They are so in love with their IP, they can't believe other people won't be. I consult to a number of tech companies, and they say, we have a tech product that works 100% of the time. We can't get anyone to try it. We can't even give them a free 30 days and have anyone try it. We can't pay them to try it. And I said, that's because you're too convincing and you're not compelling. Compelling opens people's minds. And you got to do that first before you then try to convince them. But if you try to convince people too early, you chase them away.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share, just being cognizant of time, about that framework or your work or anything in general? I really feel very honored to kind of hear the advice and your personal story today. I just want to make sure that we have a chance to talk about anything else that's really, alive for you, as we start to wrap up.
Well, I just put my QR code up there. My tech advisor gave me that thing. That'll take you to my LinkedIn profile. And that's pretty much up to date. I do have a website called Michelangelo Mindset. It was nominated for Breakthrough Ideas by Thinkers 50. I have a personal website, markgoulston.com. I have a podcast that's it's running me over. It's called My Wakeup Call. And so people can check any of those out. I also have, if I haven't bored too many of you, and some of you found my way of communicating actually tolerable or maybe interesting, I have an audio course at Himalaya Learning. So if you go to himalaya.com/defeat, the course is called Defeating Self-Defeat. And I believe if you use the word defeat in the promo, you can listen to it for free for a certain amount of time. And it's 13 chapters. I'll give you a teaser and see what you think of this. One of the chapters is on procrastination. And my belief is we procrastinate not because we're lazy, but because we're lonely. Because if you go back to college, when did you clean up the fraternity or the dormitory that was a pigsty? You all did it together. Why does AA work? Because doing it with another person takes away just feeling alone, lonely, and not wanting to do something. Because what leads to procrastination is often we are pushed to do things when we're children and we hate it. And we say to ourselves, when I get older, no one's going to make me do this. Well, guess what? There's a lot of things you need to do that will make you better. But the pain of being alone in that as a child, you don't want to re-experience as an adult. And so you procrastinate. And here's the last bit of advice. You want your kids to succeed. You want them to overcome a self-defeating behavior. What you say to them, because our kids worry about us. They want us to be healthy. They want us to eat regularly. They want us to exercise. And if you say to your kids, I need your help. What? There's something I'm wanting to do, but I'm not motivated to do it. I want to eat better. I want to exercise. Or whatever it is. Or I want to, talk nicer to your mom or your dad instead of arguing. And I'd be motivated to do it if we could do a trade. And the trade is, and then you pick something that they need to get better at that will help their life.
I love it. That's really great. Mark, thank you. This has really been wonderful. I could do this for days with you, but there's a lot of content out there that I know you've shared with our group to be able to get more of your wisdom. But I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me today and share what you've had. It's, I think, like I said before, this is really an important subject. Maybe, as much as ever. Certainly, it's really heightened at the time, and I just really appreciate what you're doing. And I'm inspired by your story that, you kind of really did find a way. When I hear all that you're up to with the podcast and the audio classes and the speaking and all the many things that you're doing, that feels very creative to me. And it does feel like you have found a way to honor that child who wanted to be creative and also found a way to use your life to serve other people. And that, to me, I think is really the goal. When you think about, the Hollywood mogul on his deathbed, I think if you've used your life, the learnings that you've had in your own life to serve your family, yourself, and other people, and in your case, many, many other people, I think that's kind of what you're looking for in those moments. That isn't about smarting yourself. I think that's about really trying to live with integrity and in alignment with our purpose. So just thank you for that. And that's I'll let you kind of put the final words on this.
So the final word, and thank you for giving me a long leash, and thank you to your listeners and viewers for tolerating that I sometimes get a little tangential. But something I wanted to share is how I pivoted to being creative. So look, I was a math science major, went to med school. It took me 6 years to get through. The day that I graduated, I took out a crappy little notebook, put down the date. It was in 1976. And the first entry was, I can't believe I made it through. They have graduated a crazy person. I'm on volume 253, 45,000 pages, 1,200 articles, 9 books, and I'm a writer. And I think it's made me, even though I'm tangential, I think it's made me reasonably articulate. And here's how journals work. A lot of times we come up with thoughts, but the world will say to us, what are you thinking about that? What are you wasting your time? And they can talk us out of something. And in my mind, if I thought something, I felt something, it was worth putting down. And then the dots connected and turned into an article or a book. And so something that, here's my last bit of wisdom, inspirational wisdom to entrepreneurs that you all know all too well. When someone says no to you, it doesn't mean you're wrong or you shouldn't do something. It just means they won't help you.
That's great. I love it. That's really great. Yeah, I think it's really important for people to hear that, because I do think that oftentimes no, or that's a bad idea is taken as fact, and that can stop somebody dead in their tracks. And as we all know, the president of the United States gets elected with 51%, and it's a landslide. So we don't need everybody to get it. So not to ignore good advice, but that doesn't mean it's fact. So
plus Jack, I'll just add this. Yeah. Jack Cochran, he was the former CEO of the Kaiser Permanente Foundation. And I spoke with him and he said, if you're an entrepreneur, I said, what's the most important thing? He said, you have to forgive your mistakes. Because if you beat up on yourself every time you make a mistake, he said, if you're an entrepreneur, you learn from mistakes. You make much more mistakes than you make right decisions, and you learn from them. But if you are merciless and you beat up on yourself every time you make a mistake, you're going to send a message to yourself to not take any risks, and you'll never make it. And I thought that was great advice.
Great advice, not just for entrepreneurs. Great advice for life and for just being a parent, a human being, that, we can't beat up on ourselves for mistakes. It's part of life. Wonderful. Mark, thanks again. I really, really appreciate the conversation and the opportunity to have you on the podcast and the work that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on.